Welcome to the Enduring Podcast. Iran plans to supply Russia with combat drones. Such alarming headlines have shaken the information space in many countries in recent weeks. The topic of Iranian unmanned aerial vehicles, with which the Kremlin seems to be trying to patch up the holes in its own military-industrial complex, arose in mid-July after the statements of National Security Advisor of the US President Jake Sullivan. The official said that Russia could receive up to several hundred drones, including combat ones. The Kremlin and Iranian authorities have denied these allegations. As of today, no reliable confirmation of the use of Iranian drones in the war against Ukraine has been recorded. However, speculative reports about the terms of the agreement between Moscow and Tehran regularly appear. To gain a deeper understanding of the topic, it is worth considering the prism through which the Iranian authorities and security interpret the war in Ukraine. Moreover, how does the context of the security situation in the Middle East affect the position of the official Tehran regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war? I talked about it with independent researcher, Ph.D. candidate of international relations at the University of Tehran, Issa Adeli. Mr. Adeli, could you please tell us whether the rumors about shipment of Iranian drones to Russia are reliable and how much they can affect the war in Ukraine?
The cooperation between Iran and Russia in terms of selling and producing drones was a normal thing, and actually it happened before. This is not the first time. I guess right now, because of this war, it became a little bit more sensitive. Actually, I think Iran needs these drones. Drones are an important part of Iranian military force, and actually, as Sullivan said, giving out 300 drones to Russia is a little bit, illogical or irreasonable. But we shouldn't forget that US intelligence was very accurate recently, especially since the start of the war. So maybe there were some talks that was normal, and then, for this time, the US focused on these bilateral relations. So in my point of view, nothing special happened, but the relations are quite normal. Maybe the US is, as I said, is a bit more sensitive in this issue. Mark Milley, the US Chief of Staff, Army Chief of Staff, and also Lloyd Austin, the MOD, said that it shows that Russia is desperate to reach to Iranian. It shows that Russia is depleted of its ammunition and weapons. If we put our analysis on this statement, it shows that these weapons, if it happens, which we are not sure yet, if it happens, will not be a game changer. So that's a very important thing. And I think the Ukrainian right now should be worried about more other things, like taking counteroffensive before winter. These are the things that they should worry. I think this will not change the situation in war.
How the trust between Ukraine and Iran can be restored in these circumstances?
I think Ukrainians should know, first of all, that people in Iran support them, and also the government in Iran has no interest in the war. It's just the problem is that Iran sees this war as a war between East and West, between Russia and NATO. And I think it's not just Iran, for all other countries that are absent in UN General Assembly or try to take a neutral position. They don't have any problem with Ukrainian. They just want to not to be in the US side. That's the problem. And they see this as they see Ukraine as a puppet of the West, which is not true. Ukraine is an independent country. And because of that, after admitting that these days are not good days in our bilateral relations, but, and I know that Ukrainian are frustrated with the position that Iranian has. But I think this is not the time to retreat, to be reactive, And I think this is the time that Ukrainian must take a more proactive diplomatic effort and try to keep dialogue with Iranian and try to actually change the narrative of this war to Iranian. Let me give you some examples. If they say that we are a democratic country and we are fighting authoritarianism, so that will not work in Iran. Or even if they say Russia breached the international rule of law, this also does not work in Iran. But the mantra in Iran is independence. Independence is very important. Iran is very focused on the discourse of independence and colonialism, things like this. So I think if Ukraine starts talking with Iranian officials, and instead of taking some reactionary moves, try to be more proactive and start dialogue with Iran. I think, for example, Iran's foreign ministry took a very neutral position, not directly because Russia is a very important ally for Iran, but indirectly condemned the war and violence, and also at the same time he blamed NATO for the cause of the war. I have to emphasize here that we're not sure that Iran will sell these weapons to Ukraine. Iranian officials strongly condemned such allegations. But even if we take it serious, I think Ukrainian, first of all, shouldn't be worried about that. Second of all, they have to start dialogue with Iran, even think Iran as a mediator. Ukraine can send messages to Russia through Iran. And I believe in Iran's foreign ministry is open to have such diplomatic affairs. I've heard that recently Zelensky has fired Iran's ambassador. I think he should send at least one of his most skillful diplomats to Tehran. And I believe if Ukraine lost Iran, it is its fault, because there is a good chance at least to keep Iran neutral in this situation.
The war in Ukraine is developing into a protracted conflict between Russia and the West. In your opinion, which line will Tehran follow? The development of trade and energy relations with the West through conclusion of the nuclear agreement, or will bet on integration towards China and Russia-led organizations such as Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS?
It's possible that Iran changed their course. And it's highly possible that in the future, by weakening Russia and China entangling with its domestic problems, it's possible that Iran takes a different action like it took before. In the previous administration, we pivot to the West, and like the one before that, we pivot to the East. But, we have to see the bigger picture. Actually, after the Cold War, we had a very different situation. There were just one hegemon in the world. But after 2007 and 2008, little by little, we started to be moved towards a bipolarity between the West and the East. And after 24th of February, I think that loose bipolarity morphed into a tight bipolarity. So these days, it's very difficult for countries to be neutral, to stay out of this conflict. You see, Putin came to Iran, Biden went to Saudi Arabia. They try to team up with countries who try to be neutral in this war. So yeah, there are pressure on Iran, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia to take sides. So yeah, that's very important. to note, especially for our Ukrainian friends, that why some countries go in a different direction. And I would like to mention the case of India. India has very good relations with Russia, but the US nor Ukraine nor any other Western countries blame India. Why? Because they know the situation in India and the competition between India and China. But I guess by the change of the situation, things will change. Some countries will lose everything. I think maybe Syria even, the situation that Assad has stuck there will be very precarious if Russia loses its place in international order, in the balance of power. But the situation in Iran is different. The Islamic Republic has come in the Cold War area and sustained since then up to this moment. So it will change course if things will change. But to answer your question, I would say that right now all minds are on the East and institutions like SCO or BRICS. That's the situation right now, with the caveat that maybe things will change in the future. Not far from now, maybe even in the near future.
Russia and Iran officially opposed Turkish military operation in northern Syria. Whether these contradictions were resolved in Astana format on July 19th.
When it comes to northern Syria, Iran and Russia are on the same page. Turkey actually, from the beginning of the civil war in Syria, had some ambitious goals to change the regime in Damascus. Now, I think Turkey finds the situation very favorable to follow its original ambitious goals that it had. If the problem was that just safe zone, 30 kilometers, buffer zone between Turkey and Syria, it could be solved easily as if, inside that Astana agreement, it could be solved. At least the Syrian army could fill up that gap, and Turkey could be assured that there will be no contact between Turkey and the Kurds. But the problem is, that's my impression. The problem is, and also, that I think that is the understanding in Iran and Russia, that Turkey has more ambitious goals. It wants to change the whole regime, and it waits about its time that Russia, as you said, stuck in Eastern Europe and reduce its presence in Syria, and the conflict between Iran and Israel increases, and then Turkey will be in a situation that can change the whole regime. I guess Israel has no problem with that. So, if the problem was, as it said in Astana, I think it's quite easy, and the three countries can agree upon. But because of these ambitious goals, I think their division, at least for the moment, is not solvable. The only result I see from that from the summit in Tehran was the grain issue. It's been solved right after the summit, and I think the negotiations in Tehran was very successful in terms of the food crisis. But when it comes to Syria, I think the situation is very dangerous and will get more dangerous. With this food crisis also hit Syria, and it would be easier for terrorist groups to recruit. And I think maybe some of them reappear again. And for the time being, as Russia and the US are engaged in Eastern Europe, there is no international coalition to face with these terrorist groups. And, as the conflict between regional powers, Iran, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, is heated, and then nobody is facing these terrorist groups. So the situation in Syria is very dangerous, and not only Astana agreement. I think that constitutional groups working on the Syrian constitution by the UN, that also will not solve the problem in this region. So yeah, that's why Assad tried to cajole Putin, because he depends on his help to stay in power. I'm not saying that necessarily he will lose power, but the situation in Syria might be in a direction that is dangerous for everyone, and everybody will lose.
Subscribe here to receive more videos from the new Geopolitics Research Network.